This is a great class today. I'm going to reframe what attachment styles really are, essentially, and give you a real good analogy and use that analogy throughout the entire class today to explain what attachment styles are and then how do we kind of combat them. So we'll first go over the actual attachment styles themselves. We'll talk about each one, how it develops, what it's really hallmarked by, and then we'll get into like how we operate in those, and then we'll get into, okay, well, what happens if we clash with our partner's attachment style? Because if we understand the clash, if we understand what their behavior means, it won't make us a problem. Basically, we can help mitigate their feelings. Doesn't mean that they're not responsible for trying to combat their own feelings and their own natural behaviors, but it allows us to give a little more grace when that person does something that is hallmarked for their attachment style. Now, there's quite a few schools of thought when it comes to attachment theory. Now, the first thing I'll say is that attachment comes typically from your parental units. Typically, men will be their main, because we all have a main and a secondary, kind of what we switch between. And in my opinion, is all based on the attachment style of the person I'm with. You know, if my main attachment style is secure, I may be secure if the other person is secure. But if they go anxious on me, right, and start pushing too much, then I may retreat into more of an avoidant. I don't know. It all just depends, right? So we have a main attachment style, which typically comes from the opposite sex parent. So in my case, the way I attach in a relationship is mainly determined by how I attach with my mother. Then how I attach in the secondary style is how I had attachments with my father. So those two attachments can make how we kind of determine things. Now, each one of the four types, it's basically how you interacted with that parent. Our attachment styles form very, very early on in life based on how we receive and process what love is. Does it feel safe? Things like that. And so it is something that is changeable through time, through work, through processing, but it's much, much harder than that. So if we imagine that your attachment style is like your emotional operating system, right? Every style of computer out there has a different operating system, and the way we put inputs may look similar, keyboards and whatnot, but there's different things that happen in the processing of that information as it goes into the computer's operating system. Then the outputs that computer is going to give you is different. For example, on a Mac computer and a PC computer, Control Z, Control V, Control P, they actually operate different on every single one of the different systems, right? They're generally the same, but they're not, right? Because they're different operating systems. Our attachment styles are very, very similar. Okay, so if we imagine that we have downloaded, right, this operating system from our parents at a very, very early age, then we can see that this is just how we are wired. This is the way we operate, right? But that doesn't mean that we cannot update our software. It does not mean that I can't debug the problems that are on a computer when problems arise. Okay, so what we have to understand is that they are permanent until we put in work to change our attachment style. And it can be much more difficult in certain cases, depending on how deeply rooted the trauma is that caused that attachment style. It can be other ulterior traumas. It can be compounded by the fact that, if I was an avoidant and I ended up in a relationship with an anxious person every single time, it made me want to be even more avoidant over time. So we have to understand that these systems can be very, very deeply rooted. So it's not as simple as, oh, I did like 3 weeks worth of work on my system. Suddenly I'm going to be different. That's not how it works. Most behavioral changes take 6 months to a year to really start to take hold. So like I talk about in my book, when it comes to retraining the nervous system, even 6 months to a year is not going to be enough to get your nervous system to be accustomed to this new I feel safe mentality that you're going to have. Same thing here. Just because I was once anxious does not mean that I'm not going to be anxious because I do some work. And some of that work is internal to understand myself, But when I get in a relationship, then I'm going to have to be triggered, and I'm going to have to face those triggers in a healthy manner repeatedly over time before they're going to go away. And a lot of times we end up in a relationship with someone that doesn't understand attachment theory, and I'm working on my attachment. All they are doing is throwing gasoline on a fire, making it more difficult for me to work through it. So it's something that takes in many cases 2 to 3 years to really solidify a new attachment style, or at least be able to mimic a more secure attachment style going forward in the future. Okay. So again, you weren't born with this. Your brain downloads this whole operating system based on how it sees your parents interact with you and each other in a lot of ways. Okay. So just like I said, we can get updated, and we'll get to that at the very, very end. We'll talk about working on your attachment styles. But I first want to go into, well, where does this even come from? So we know it's our parents, right? But how does that really play in? So your first relationships, usually with caregivers, set the tone for how you experience love, safety, and need expression, right? If love was consistent, you learn to trust it. If love was inconsistent, dangerous, or confusing, you adapt to survive, not to connect. And the way we adapt is going to come out in how we are as a partner, as an attachment. Now, I want to make something very, very clear here. There's only 2 different, technically, styles of attachment. We are either anxious or we are secure. And then what we do with that anxiety, because they both are hallmarked by anxiety, but what they do and how they operate makes them look like they're either anxious, avoidant, or disorganized. Okay. So I'm not saying that they don't all, like, it's not just like, oh, we have an anxiety ridden one and then we have an avoidant one. They are both anxiety driven. And that anxiety causes the person to do something different in behavior. And the reason why we call the anxious one the anxious attachment is typically because it looks like anxiety. We can put our finger on it that it's anxiety because they start doing the overthinking. They do all those crazy things that most people with anxiety are going to do. But the avoidant does not look like anxiety. They actually look like cool, calm, and collected, like they could care less. But on the inside, they have got anxiety pinging them all over the place. So these attachment styles are you're either secure or you're anxious, okay? And then what we do with that anxiety is how we determine what attachment style we actually have. So I want to make sure that that's clear. But it all comes again from, if love felt consistent, we can trust it, right? So the analogy is, think of your attachment style as, again, your emotional software. The inputs are moments of connection, stress, or conflict. That's typing on the keyboard. So that's your connection, stress, or conflict. That's inputting into your system. Then our brain is going to process that information. That processing system interprets those inputs and what they mean to us. Then from there, we're going to have an output. This is our behaviors. Do we cling? Do we withdraw? Do we reassure? Do we attack? Do we defend? Do we shut down? Do we connect? Do we yell? Do we scream? All of those behaviors are the output from what has been inputted and how our brain is processing. So the way our brain is processing is the actual operating system. So when I say an attachment style, it's the way we process information and what it means to us. We can change that. The outputs are just what happens when our processing has finished, essentially. So if I change the processing system, I can change my outputs. I can change how I react to it. That doesn't take just a couple sessions, worth of work. That's going to take a lot of time with somebody, either a coach or a therapist, that's going to be able to understand your attachment style and then give you like accurate coping mechanisms to be able to get past them. It's not as simple as having just count to 3, take a couple deep breaths. There's much, much deeper as we get into it. When we start talking about when systems clash, you'll see some of those tools that will be in practice and how we can use them. Over time, you don't necessarily need to use the tools anymore because you start to process on a higher level and understand things. And as you understand things, you typically don't have a lot of the bad behaviors. Okay. So what are the 4 emotional operating systems or attachment styles? Okay. Well, everybody knows of the secure attachment, right? That's the balanced system. There's a core belief behind it. The core belief is love is reliable. Love is safe. I am safe. I can connect without losing myself. Okay. And again, this core belief in someone that is secure can change if that person that they are with is unsafe. This is kind of like in a vacuum, right? If the person, they're going to stay in a secure style until that person starts to do things that start to poke at them, that shake their trust in and confidence in that relationship. Okay, so how it develops is when we're children, we have very responsive and stable caregivers, very, very consistent with us with how they treat us, right? Emotions were mirrored and honored. What I mean is, when we talk about emotions being mirrored and honored, means that parent allows us to feel it and shows empathy towards us when we're a child. So if we bump our knee, right, they're not going to tell us, hey, just shut up, suck it up. That actually causes anxiety. That actually causes avoidant techniques or avoidant attachment styles. So what we have to understand is that a parent that's like, oh man, that sucks that you skinned your knee, but are you okay? Are you good? We're honoring that child's feeling, because their emotions, we may look at a skinned knee and be like, oh man, that's nothing to be worried about. But in their world, it's panic, right? It's, oh my gosh, they don't know that they're not going to die. So when we start using bad language there, or we start telling them to suck it up, we are telling them that they have to perform to go forward with life, that they have to act a certain way. Otherwise, they do not get empathy and love from us. Okay, because as a child feels love a lot of times through how we empathize with them. So the emotions being mirrored are very, very important in young childhood, right? Connection didn't feel like a risk. And a lot of times connection can feel like a risk in multiple scenarios of abusive relationships, relationships where the parent has an addiction, something like that, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay. So again, going back to this software system, right? So the inputs that secure attachment styles hone in on are a partner needing space, a disagreement, and emotional closeness. How they're going to process that is, this doesn't threaten my worth. I can express myself and still be loved. I don't need to panic to stay connected. So they're going to be able to co-regulate themselves, or regulate themselves and co-regulate their partner. They're going to be able to process through and not react to the emotions that they're feeling a lot of times. Okay. So they've processed through all this, and then their healthy outputs are going to be things like healthy boundaries, clear communication, consistent emotional availability. I want to make that one very, very clear. Consistent emotional availability is one of the hallmark signs of a secure attachment style. They're there emotionally. They may be a little bit erratic, because we're never going to be perfect. We're not saying that a secure attachment style doesn't have rise and fall of emotions. What we're saying, though, is that they're going to be consistently showing up with their emotions in a relationship. They're not going to shut down. They're not going to typically do all those things that the anxious and or avoidant are going to do. Okay. They're also going to be able to self-soothe, co-regulate, and regulate their own thoughts and emotions. They do not have to lean on somebody else for external validation. Okay, so that's the secure attachment style. The anxious attachment, I call this the overheating processor, right? Like if you try to open too many tabs on a computer, the computer starts to heat up, and then it starts to like short circuit itself, and it doesn't work, right? So the inputs that we're putting in end up being overwhelming to an anxious attachment style. What is the core belief behind it? Well, their core belief is, I must earn love. I must prove my worth. If I don't prove my worth, I will be left at the end of this. Okay. So again, going back to that child, if we're telling that child, shut up, suck it up, we are telling them that they have to perform in order to gain love. We are expecting perfection from that child. So what ends up happening is, in adults, that's where we become anxious. If something isn't going right, we're going to make the assumption that everything is wrong. Okay. So it's inconsistency from a caregiver. Love was available sometimes, withdrawn other times. Emotional needs were met unpredictably is what causes anxious attachment style. So the inputs that really matter to somebody that is an anxious attachment style is like delayed responses in text. So you send a text, and, let's say you're going back and forth with text, right? This is probably the clearest way to really illustrate this. You're going back and forth with text, every 2 to 3 minutes, somebody's texting back, and then you text something that is slightly vulnerable to you. Then they go 4 hours without saying anything back. Could be that they're in a meeting, could be all sorts of things going on. But what ends up happening is you start to feel like something's wrong, they're abandoning me, that kind of stuff. So that delayed response is one of the critical inputs for someone that has an anxious attachment style. Emotional distance is a major input for us as an anxious attachment style. and then silence or conflict. So those things, the delayed responses, the emotional distance, silence or conflict, cause major processing issues inside the brain of somebody that is an anxious attachment. So their processing is going to tell themselves, like, where the overthinking kind of goes to is a system thinking something's wrong, I'm being abandoned, I need to fix this immediately or I'll lose them, it's probably my fault. Those three things typically ring true in the brains of anxious attachment styles. That's what's driving their force. They're basically saying, I have to do more because they're leaving me because I'm not doing enough. Because again, as a child, we think that we have to perform in some way, shape, or form to get that love from our parents. So some of the ways this is going to output, right? So we've processed this. Something's wrong. I'm being abandoned. I need to fix this. It's probably my fault. I need to fix what is my fault, right? So the outputs end up being texting repeatedly. Ding, 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 4, 5, 6, 7 texts in a row. Okay. One of the clearest signs for me of somebody that has a unregulated nervous system is broken text. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times what ends up happening, you see like incomplete thoughts. A person whose nervous system is regulated is going to take a couple deep breaths. They're going to think of a whole paragraph of what to say back. But then the unregulated person, it's like single sentences over and over. They send it and they're like, "Oh, I should have said this," and they add to it. Like, "Oh, I should have said this," and they add to it. That's signaling that person has got some sort of nervous system dysregulation, and it most often comes out in an anxious attachment style. They typically are going to be that way. They're going to text repeatedly. They're going to over apologize. They're going to be emotional, like what we call emotionally flooding. Everything is extremely, like they feel emotion in extreme cases. Like everything is worst or best case scenario. There is no in between with somebody that has an anxious attachment style. They're going to have hypervigilance to tone, timing, and behavior. So just a bad tone from a partner can set them off. Like, what's wrong? Like, and they start freaking out that there is something wrong inside that relationship. Okay. Again, because love was inconsistent. So they judged it based on what they could understand. And as a child, what we can understand is I'm not doing what I've been asked to be done as a child. So I'm not getting love. So we try to perform more and become more perfect in order to do that. Perfection is a one-way ticket to anxiety. If we try to be perfect, we're never going to make it. We're always going to beat ourselves up, and we're always going to end up in that circle, in that overthinking circle of I'm not being perfect enough. Let's think of this anxious attachment style as like somebody that has a battery in their phone on 1% and they're searching for a charger frantically. That charger is the validation that they're looking for from others. So an anxious attachment style wants that reassurance that you're not going anywhere because their fears are telling them that they're not worth it, that you're just going to leave, that they're going to be abandoned, all of that stuff. So they're like a battery that's on 1% and just frantically searching for a charger. Now, we have the avoidant attachment. The autonomy only firewall, right? This firewall, the avoidant wants to keep that firewall up and say, I need to keep my hyper independence that I have going on. Okay. Again, it's not that they don't want or want, like they don't want connection. They don't want love. They just know that every time they have had love in their life, that it has always turned out bad. Right. So the core belief here is love is invasive. If I open up, I'll be controlled or hurt. So how does this develop? Well, it develops from emotionally distant caregivers. Your needs were not met materially, or were met materially, but not emotionally. If you've got parents that, when you try to tell them you're feeling a certain way and they're like, well, you've had dinner, you've got a shower, you have everything you need. What is the problem? Like they can't understand because they can't empathize. Remember that mirroring of emotions that we need as a child isn't there. They're not meeting your emotional needs. They're only meeting your physical needs to be able to continue to live life. And you're not getting love. So you don't understand how to attach at that point. So it's very, very dangerous for this type of person when they have not had anything but their material needs met since very, very early age, right? They learned that vulnerability equals weakness a lot of times. So, whenever they do open up, they are made to feel stupid or silly for it as a child. So they would tell someone what their feelings are and they're made to feel stupid for it. And that creates an avoidant a lot of times, especially if it is consistently that way, that they're made to feel stupid for opening up, that they are never met emotionally. Like, it's the combination of a lot of these things. Because some of them, if you learn that vulnerability equals weakness because a parent made you feel stupid a lot, it could end up in an anxious attachment style if that parent was giving you love 1 minute and then asking like this the other minute. It goes back and forth, okay? So the inputs, processing, and outputs for somebody that is an avoidant attachment partner. Remember, a firewall. They're trying to keep everybody out, right? A partner wanting closeness, emotional requests, or vulnerability are the inputs that really matter to an avoidant. That's going to set them off. The processing that they're going to go through when they do get a partner that's wanting closeness, right? They may open up and say, I really miss you. Like, that's all it takes for an avoidant to get triggered, essentially. They're going to think this is pressure. I need space to feel safe. If I get too close, I'm going to lose control. I'm going to lose autonomy. I'm going to lose my independence. I'm going to have to rely on this person if I open up too much. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to do, in the output side, I'm going to pull away during intimacy. I'm going to go silent during conflict. I'm going to shut down a lot of times. I won't say anything. Even if you ask me a direct question as an avoidant, I wouldn't say anything. I'll just be like, and I won't say anything. You're going to be dismissing or downplaying emotional needs of somebody else, focusing on logic over emotion. That dismissing or downplaying emotional needs, a lot of times it comes out as defensiveness too. And what an avoidant will do is be like basically trying to invalidate the other person by telling them that they were wrong for the way they feel, not for my actions that caused it, essentially. We're going to try to deflect that blame somewhere else a lot of times. It's a way of, defensiveness is a way of dismissing. So the analogy here for you guys to understand this type of attachment style is, imagine it's like an antivirus protection. When you set antivirus protection, you can actually set how sensitive that it is. We have now, this is like an overprotective antivirus system that literally keeps out connection because it's blocking anything that looks like a threat. So that's what ends up happening is they pull away, they go silent, they may ghost you for 3 to 4 days because they have to pull away because it makes them feel so uncomfortable if somebody's trying to have intimacy with them, vulnerability, things like that. Okay. Now, the last attachment style. Now, this last attachment style, if you ask different therapists and you look and research a lot of this, you're going to find that some attachment theory people say there's only really 3, that a person that is disorganized might be just both their primary and secondary being the anxious and avoidant is their primary and their secondary. Some people even go as far as saying that the disorganized attachment style comes from having some sort of personality disorder. There's a lot of different debate on this topic, but I'm one of those persons or people that believe that a disorganized attachment style is an actual style, number one. And number two, it's basically just switching between being avoidant and being anxious. And I'll tell you why and how I think it develops versus other ones, and why it is still considered a fourth one and not necessarily a personality disorder like some therapists I've known have told me. So again, disorganized. It's kind of like a glitching system. It like kind of flip-flops back and forth, like a TV that the picture just won't get right. It just kind of keeps flip-flopping between 2 different pictures, right? It's a glitching system. So their core belief in behind the disorganized is love is dangerous, but I crave it, right? The disorganized attachment style is known as the push-pull style for a reason a lot of times. Okay, so how does this develop? Caregivers were unpredictable or unsafe. Abuse, neglect, and addiction. Okay, because of that type of abuse and that neglect and the addiction. Okay, so let's think of like people that are having addictions, and this is how I can relate it the best way I can to a disorganized and how it kind of develops. Imagine you have a parent that has an alcohol addiction. When they're not drinking, they're the nicest, most empathetic person you've ever met in your entire life, right? And then as soon as they drink, they go into this mean, dismissive person. They're a Jekyll and Hyde of sorts, which makes us go back and forth on what we need, right? And so if they imagine somebody going between 2 different forms of abusive neglect, right? Where and when they're not drinking, they're going to be that person that is very, you need to perform to get what you need. But then you have, when they drink, they become this person that is demoralizing. They make fun of you for emotions. They don't want you to have emotions. That right there is going to create this push pull between anxious and avoidant. Now, the disorganized attachment style is really going to be, I call it the anxious and avoidant, but sometimes it can be, I can feel secure 1 minute and then go avoidant the next, then a secure 1 minute and then avoidant next. So I switch between two different styles back and forth, because there are certain things that the other person is going to do that's going to set me off into one or the other. So when they're making me feel comfortable, I may be like, yes, this is awesome. But then they may get too close and I'm like, oh crap, this doesn't work for me, and I might get avoidant. Or they might do something specifically that makes me feel like they're about to abandon me, so I push them away immediately. So this style is, it can be a combination of other styles, but I typically more than likely going to be an anxious and an avoidant in one person. And it's going to switch pretty fast between the two of them. They're going to be like, I would say 3 days on, 3 days off. So 3 days one direction, 3 days the other. So they'll pull you in and they'll push you away for 3 days. A lot of times in early dating, what this is going to be is that guy that goes distant for 3 to 4 days. And it doesn't necessarily mean he's avoidant, okay? There could be other things going on, but typically if somebody's trying to connect and attach to you and they go silent for a 24-hour period, that's okay. But once we pass 24 hours, they are acting as an avoidant of some sort. And it could be because they have somebody else that they're trying to also date. But even then, that means that they are able to detach from you. And avoidants are very good at detaching from you. Okay, so if they start to do that, where they start ghosting for 3-4 days at a time, then resurface, they might be showing you signs of either the avoidant attachment style or a disorganized. Because when they come back after that 3 to 4 days, they might go really into the relationship, like, oh my gosh, yes, we got to go on a date. Oh my gosh, you're so awesome. Oh my gosh, I've never felt like this. And then they go ghost for 3 days, and it makes you really, really confused, because you're like, I thought we were working somewhere. I thought we were trying to get somewhere, and this person is now going the opposite direction, like hard. Right? That's typically what a disorganized feels like, because they're going to be all into you. Because like I said, love is dangerous, but I still crave it. So they crave it and they come after you. They try to prompt you to give them love. And as soon as they get their tank full and it starts to feel like you might abandon them because you find out they've got weaknesses and all this stuff, then they're going to push you away and they're going to act like, oh, I don't care about this person. And that's a hallmark of a disorganized attachment style. One of the hardest attachment styles to deal with in a relationship is a disorganized attachment style. I call it a moving target, because every single day what they expect of you how you need to act towards them is going to change. Their needs can change on a dime. So it makes it very, very hard for me to be consistent for that person if they're all over the map. So I say, when you start seeing that somebody has a disorganized attachment style, if you're in a relationship with them and you want to learn, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you're going to have to figure out on your own based on them. You have to journal all their behaviors, and they're going to have to come to terms with, they're going to have to change some of those behaviors. Otherwise, it will never work. A true disorganized attachment style that doesn't do any work to change who they are is going to have almost an impossible time trying to be in a relationship with anybody in any of the other three. It's going to create more problems than anything, okay? So what are the inputs that really matter to a disorganized attachment? Emotional intimacy, a stable relationship, conflict, or perceived betrayal. Those three things are going to cause that person to do something, okay? The processing that's behind it. So it goes into the computer, into the software. The software's like, all right, I got to figure out what's going on. It's going to process it, and it's going to say to itself, this feels too good. It's going to crash. Like they always, a disorganized attachment is always waiting for that impending doom, okay? And so they're like, oh, this feels too good. And that's when they tend to go into the avoidant. They'll go the opposite direction. So they got really, really into you, and then, oh no, this is scary, and they got to run from you. The other way they process is, I want closeness, but don't trust it, right? They want closeness, so they may have sex with you, all these things, but afterwards they're going to be emotionally distant because they don't want to be emotionally connected to you, because they're afraid if they're emotionally connected to you, that's going to go away. So we have to be on the lookout for that. They're also going to process it in a way that says, I need to test or destroy this before it destroys me. So a lot of times they'll back away as a test to see what you do, and then they're going to blame you. So they'll back away for 3 days, and then when you don't reach out and you don't say anything and you decide to move on, they'll be like, see, They were going to do that anyways. So they'll destroy it in order to blame the other person and say, see, my fears were correct. And that's an important thing to note. It's very, very important to note that they're doing it as a way of saying that they're not the problem. See, I was right and not putting my stuff into it. Knowing that going into it, we can, if we are dating someone like that, we can have a little bit more empathy and we can understand what our role is going to be at pulling that person and coaxing them out of that kind of place. So what are the outputs then after I've processed all this? Disorganized are typically the self-sabotage, like really bad self-sabotage. Anxious, they will do it too in themselves. The avoidance, they will do it. But the disorganized, they self-sabotage bad, right? They will even typically tell you, like, I don't deserve this relationship, like things like that. Whereas like an anxious will just be like, are you going to abandon me? Like they're more worried about getting out of you what you want to say. The disorganized is going to head it off at the pass and tell you that they don't deserve a relationship. Like, I never deserved a woman like you. I never deserved a guy like you. You know, I'm just not good enough for this. That's what you're going to hear, that self-sabotage. You're going to hear emotional explosions or stonewalling typically is going to be their output. They're also going to have very fast attachment and then sudden fear. So they're going to attach really hard. A lot of times in the first like 3 to 5 days that you're texting this person, you may end up texting them every single hour, and they're going to say some things that typically are like a little bit like, I don't know. And a lot of times it sounds like things like I'm going to delete the apps because I totally think you're the one for me. Right. And this is what makes it so difficult is they say that, and for men saying it to women, because women do typically, they kind of key in on words a little more than men do. So the man says that, and she gets all like, oh my gosh, this guy could be the one. He's like all into me. And then the next day he ghosts for like 3 or 4 days. That's the sudden fear coming out. So they are pursue and then retreat, pursue, retreat. That's why I call it the push pull. They're going to pull you in and then they're going to push you away. They're going to pull you in, they're going to push you away. So if you feel like you have that push pull dynamic, more than likely you're in a relationship with someone like this. Again, this is where you do want to get outside opinion because there could be a potential behavior disorder behind it. But typically, more often than not, I get clients that come to me telling me they're with a narcissist or a borderline personality disorder. We go through the motions and we find out that they are a disorganized attachment style. In a lot of those cases, I give them some tools and ways to cope and mitigate, and it actually minimizes the effects of that other person. And by minimizing the effects of the other person, we're disarming them so that love feels better for them. We are actually, for those of us that have higher emotional intelligence, it is our responsibility to help the person that has less emotional intelligence. If I want the relationship to continue, if I don't want if I don't want to put in that work, that's fine, but the relationship has to go away then. There's no way it's going to work unless you are willing as a partner to be able to put in the more work for that person if you have higher emotional intelligence. And if we do, we can actually turn those relationships around. We can start to heal some of their wounds from the past in attachments to where they become less and less like that disorganized attachment style, or less and less like the avoidant attachment style, so on and so forth, right? So if we want to put in the work and we want to put in the work to understand our partner, it may go a long way, and we may end up being able to salvage a relationship that may have looked horrible on the outside. But again, it's not going to be something you're going to be able to just read a book on attachment theory and understand. You've got to have an outside opinion that can look into your relationship, figure out where the broken parts are, because a person looking from the outside in can tell you that you're, say you're secure and they're disorganized, that it's just lack of communication in this one area. They're going to tell you, well, it's lack of understanding of their triggers, and you are continually triggering them. Let's work on figuring out their triggers and figuring out ways that you can get around it. We get to this section here in a second when we talk about how to deal with them. You'll see what I mean by some of these, but you won't know which one to use a lot of times until you have somebody looking into the relationship that can clearly see what the communication breakdown and where it's at. And you can't really do that when you're the one in the relationship, because we always have bias to what we want to see. What I want to see, I'm going to find it in the relationship. And so a person from the outside is not biased by anything. They're not like looking for something specific and finding something specific. They're looking at it from a grander picture scale. Okay. The analogy here for this one is like it's like a computer trying to run two opposite programs at once, love and fear. It overheats, crashes, restarts, and repeats. Right? You ever get one of those things where you download a program that is not compatible with your main operating system? That program, every time it opens up, it crashes the system. That's exactly what's going on here. Their system is not, it's designed for love, but as soon as something feels unsafe, it short circuits the entire system, crashes the computer, we have to restart. And it's an endless loop over and over again, right? So now that we've talked about those four attachment styles, the secure, the anxious, the avoidant, and the disorganized, we're going to talk about what we do when these styles clash. Okay, so most relationships aren't broken by love. They're broken by nervous systems trying to feel safe in different ways. Understanding what triggers each style and how their needs often feel like threats to the other is the first step in repairing the pattern instead of repeating it. So in order to change how a relationship is, we can't force the other person to change who they are. What I can do is change how I react to my partner based on their attachment style, which means that I have to show, like if we really love somebody, I cannot force them to just change, but I have to show that I understand them and that I'm willing to meet them in the middle and start doing things necessary to show that I care about their feelings, I care about their triggers enough to try to sidestep them in the meantime until we can get them into a position where they're in a healthier attachment style, okay? Again, this goes back to if we have a higher emotional intelligence, we kind of have an obligation in that relationship if we want it to continue to be the one to put in a little bit more work, if that makes sense, right? So let's talk about the first pairing that typically goes south. The most common one I see over and over and over again is an anxious attachment style and an avoidant, right? And here's the clash. The anxious partner seeks connection for regulation. That's why the anxious person goes after, right? The avoidant partner needs space to regulate. So the anxious partner is going to chase and the avoidant partner is going to retreat. Do we see the problem right there? So if we've got them sitting like this, right, and the avoidant starts trying to avoid, then it's going to make the anxious person anxious and they're going to pursue. And the anxious person never makes it to meet where the avoidant's at, and the avoidant never gets far enough away to process. So it's like this chasing game where you have a dog chasing his tail around the room. It's all that's going to happen. Both of them feel more unsafe the more they try to soothe themselves in ways that activate the other. So again, the avoidant tries to avoid, that triggers the anxious then has to pursue. That pursuing makes the avoidant want to be more avoidant, and that more avoidant it circles, okay? It just circles in a big circle. So what are the three tools that I like to use right here, okay? The first one is understanding as the avoidant, right, that I have to bind my space in time. Meaning I can't just be like, I can't talk about this right now. And then you walk away, right? And you go ghost for days. If you are an avoidant, you have to understand that you have to set limits on that time that you step away from the relationship for your partner's sake. That's meeting in the middle. That's saying, I'm going to take my space, but for my partner to be able to feel safe as well, I'm going to tell them I'm going to come back to this in an hour, right? I need to take space and step away from this for an hour. I'll text you at 6 and we'll talk. Okay, that's a big one, right? Like saying that there's an ending to this suffering, so to speak, because the anxious person, if you do not give them a time, their brain is going to eat themselves because that anxiety is going to circle and it's going to make it worse and worse and worse. And all they're going to want to do is pursue. And if you are the avoidant coming back into the conversation, you feel refreshed and ready to talk. What you just did, though, was stab your partner repeatedly. They're gonna have this emotional vomit all over you the minute you walk back into that relationship. So that's being selfish by saying, I want my space. We need to put a time boundary on it so that way we can say, I care about my partner's feelings at the same time. That's saying that I want to honor what we both need in the relationship. And that's better than just honoring one person or the other. We need to do something that honors both people at the same time in the best way possible for both people. The next one I like to talk about is called anchors of reassurance. A predictable check-in, pet name, or safe phrase. So if I'm an avoidant and I understand this, right, I will tell my partner, like, look, babe, I'll use the word babe. So that way she knows that, hey, I'm still here. I'm still present. I'm still in this relationship, but I need to take a step back for a minute. Like, hey, babe, everything's fine, but I need to take an hour, away from this right real quick. That word babe makes her think that, okay, well, nothing's really wrong. And even if it is, it can't be that bad because he's just taking some space, something like that, right? Using safe phrases like everything is fine. Everything is fine. I don't want to alarm you. Things like that. Those are anchors of reassurance. We need to make sure that the and a lot of this work has to come from the avoidant, but the work for the anxiety person is that now how they receive that space and that reassurance is they don't pursue. So the work that each one has to do is a little bit different. The avoidant has to get better at communicating, and the anxious has to get better at not pursuing when the time and the space and the things get in the way. Like, remember we talked about them not texting back very fast, like that drawing anxiety. If they've used one of these anchors of reassurance, we have to, as the anxious partner, say, okay, I need to let them go. I'll just breathe my way through it. That's my part in it. They did something to reassure me so I wasn't super triggered. And now I have to do a part to make sure that they know I care about them by doing the same thing. So each one of these, both people are putting in work, even though it may not look like it, because a lot of this has to come from the start from the avoidant, because the avoidant is typically the one that's not going to communicate as much. Now, conflict scripts, right? So having kind of like, what do we do when conflict arises, right? We can say things like, let's pause this for 15 minutes. We can say like, hey, I have something to talk to you about. It's not that bad. We need to have some form of communication that is worked out before conflict happens. Not in the first time conflict happens, you just try to work it out right there. But before conflict happens, so in a happy moment in your relationship, you say, look, when conflict arises, it makes me want to do this. It makes you want to do this. What are some things that we can say that are going to help each other out? And we have those scripts ready to go to use, and we practice them so that way, as soon as conflict starts to arise, we can utilize those scripts, because it then signals that the other person that everything's okay. We're not that bad off. We just need to take a step back if we have those scripts ahead of time, okay? Now, the next form of clashing styles that I typically run into a lot is avoidant and avoidant, right? This one is actually more common to me from what I've seen than anxious and anxious, right? The avoidant and the avoidant, right? The clash is that both partners are going to withdraw. Well, if we see that both partners are withdrawing, they're both going to wait for the other one to flinch, and we may never end up going back to each other, right? So it's something that can be very, very difficult, but both avoidants have to pull out of this somehow, because vulnerability feels like exposure. So needs are usually buried. The distance becomes the default. Emotional depth is avoided, leading to numbness or parallel lives. And a lot of times an avoidant is when you hear two people say this phrase: we just grew apart and became different people. We just feel like friends living with each other. That typically happens because neither partner wants to put in an emotional, they're never felt emotionally safe enough to open up, and they've avoided emotional connection. If two people grow apart, they are not putting their emotions in. They're avoiding the emotional connection within a relationship. Like, the anxious wants more emotional connection, the avoidant wants less. So if you grow apart with somebody, typically you're not putting in the work to stay emotionally connected to them. So it's typically an avoidant that you're. That's why I say that so often, that it's either, I typically see either an anxious and avoidant or an avoidant and avoidant. I very rarely see an anxious and anxious, because they literally end up breaking it off before it gets too far, because they're both way too anxious. They both are way too much for each other. It typically feels like, wow, this is way too much for me, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. So what are some tools that an avoidant can utilize to get past this? The first one is scheduled check-ins. We do an emotional check-in once per week at a minimum, right? That emotional check-in with specific prompts that I've worked on with either a therapist or a coach to give me prompts with my partner, that we can use these prompts on a regular basis, right? So, one thing I appreciated about you this week, one thing that I really enjoyed that you did this week, one thing that made me smile this week. We can use those prompts to do check-ins. We can usually use prompts too for the conflict side of it and say, what's one thing that I wish would have gone different with us this week, right? We are literally forcing ourselves to have emotional connection by using words like appreciate, disliked this, right? We use words to describe things, and that's letting our emotions out. We are literally going to have to schedule time to stay emotionally connected to each other. If we do not, that's where we start drawing away from each other. We live separate lives. Next thing you know, we are just living together. We are just best friends that occasionally have sex with each other. And that sex becomes very, very cold, and it's literally just a way to get off. It is not a way to emotionally and intimately connect with your partner. Okay. Some written expression stuff can work very, very well for avoidance, right? And this is as simple as when either one feels like they want to avoid, say, okay, well, we'll avoid anything when it comes to talking to each other, but we will text each other, because texting our emotions to someone can feel a little bit easier because I can hide behind the phone, so to speak. And where I don't say that's a great idea, it's a start, though, for us to start learning how to express each other, express to each other. So we keep a wall up that makes us feel comfortable enough to be that little bit of vulnerable. And then and through time, as I am vulnerable with that person, it makes it easier, right? So typically, like journal sharing. So another one besides just texting each other is each person writes in their journal every single night. And then once a week, you're allowed to read your partner's journal, right? And you know you're going to get to read your partner's journal, right? But it helps with the emotional connection piece of it, so that way both parties get to experience what the other one is thinking and feeling from that perspective that's a little more raw, but we're not having to put it out of our mouth. One of the things that avoidants hate more than anything is verbalizing what they're feeling. A lot of times they can write it down and you can read it and they're fine with it. They just do not like to verbalize it straight to you, okay? So that's how you deal with an avoidant and avoidant. Now, how do we deal with anxious and anxious? Both partners become dysregulated during stress. Conflict feels catastrophic. They overfunction, panic, and feed off each other's nervous systems, right? So a lot of times what'll happen is one person's anxiety will spiral the other one's, and next thing you know, we're both spiraling off into this crazy loop of problems, right? Literally feeding off each other. So what are some tools that we can use? Okay. So what I like to use a lot of times is a co-regulation. And co-regulation meaning that we are using both of our nervous systems to kind of vibrate in the same frequency, if you will. It's kind of a good way to look at it. And we do that through touch and breath. So what I will typically tell people if they're anxious is sit back to back on the floor, Indian style, right? Put your feet, cross your legs in front of you. Sit back to back, mimic each other's breathing. So you're going to breathe, whether it be a 4-7-8 method, a box breathing method, whatever you're going to use, a 4-4-4-8, 4-4-6, whatever breathing method you're going to use, sit back to back and breathe in at the same rate, exhale at the same rate, hold in the same places, all the same stuff. And you can go a step further and, reach your hand back and you can hold hands with each other while you do it. This is extremely powerful, and it may sound extremely silly. It may sound extremely stupid, but most people that are willing to try this end up feeling 1,000 times more connected to their partner and relaxed because they've done something like this. This co-regulation is something that really needs to be talked about more in circles like this because it really does help. We are literally using our nervous systems. My nervous system's calming hers, and hers is calming mine. And we calm down faster. Think about it like two cars running around a racetrack, right? When one car is going, he has a lot of wind resistance. When I put a second car behind him, those two cars together can go faster through the air than one car alone. The back car is pushing the front car, and the front car is pulling the back car. They can go faster mile per hour wise because of the fact that they are running together. So when we try to regulate by putting our back to back with somebody and we co-regulate through breathing, we're both going to be able to come down off of whatever emotional anxiety high that we are on much, much faster. So if you find yourself are both anxious, do that. Try it. Try that co-regulation. You can do it in other methods too, where you sit across from each other and you just hold hands, you look into each other's eyes and you breathe, right? There's other methods even than that, but those are typically the only two that I find that work. But in back-to-back breathing, it's more powerful than just holding hands because there's more. We're touching our vagus nerves essentially to each other because of the way the nerve runs in us. Okay. The next thing I talk about is delayed expression. Instead of wanting to say something to your partner, You let them say whatever they're going to say, that you let them trigger you, and instead of like let's say you text them something vulnerable and they don't respond immediately. Don't respond to them. Go to somewhere you can write it down, or you can, type it up on a computer, or you can type it on your own phone, but you do not send it to them. Write it down, wait 20 minutes, and then revisit that text again after you've had some time to calm down. Because a lot of times what happens is when we revisit that, either by the time I put the timer of 20 minutes on it, they've already texted back, or but by the time I get back to them, like, yeah, that's a little bit harsh to say it like that. We're going to find ourselves taking that pause and that break, and we're going to come back to it, and the emotion's going to be lessened just enough for us to see where it was bad right here. Okay, so again, delayed expression. Don't express the emotion immediately. I'm sure some of you guys have heard the thing where it says, anytime you think of an angry text, write it and then immediately delete it. Don't send it to the person. Don't send an angry text to somebody because you're going to regret it later, right? And the same thing can be true here for an anxious. A lot of times they regret their behavior as soon as they do it, or as soon as they feel it, as soon as they think it. They're like, I hate this about me, right? So instead, express that emotion, but do it in paper form and don't send it to the person. Revisit it in 20 minutes and revise it. And then continue to do that until that person reaches out and you have time to actually talk to them about it. Or write it down, revise it a couple times, and then allow them to read it later, so that way you guys can read each other's anxiety thoughts and feel a little more comfortable about it. Now, what happens if you're secure with any of the insecure, right? So you've got secure attachment style and anxious, avoidant, or disorganized. That's the next most common. Well, the clash is that secure partners offer consistency, which can feel unfamiliar to insecure partners. Insecure styles may interpret stability as boredom, pressure, or too good to be true. Anxious people find stability as boredom. Avoidance find it as pressure, and disorganized find it too good to be true, if you want to look at it that way. Okay, so what are some tools that we can use to kind of combat that? Consistent reinforcement. I'm still here. I'm not mad. I just needed space. We need that kind of reassurance. You can go both ways, right? When the avoidant backs out, they need to look at reassuring their partner the same way they were doing with an anxiety person. But the secure person needs to kind of have the little bit, because they're going to have usually a little bit higher emotional intelligence. So they're going to have to reframe it as, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not mad at you. We're going to work this out. This is still okay. We are still safe. They are going to have to a lot of times regulate. And by doing that reassurance, they're secure, and they can fall into the trap of, becoming anxious or whatever. But by reassuring their partner, they're going to ease their partner's tension, and their partner's usually going to take a step closer to them. So an anxious person is going to at least stop their over pursuing of the secure when we reassure them. They're like, oh, okay, we're good. We're good. I don't need to pursue. I don't need to be so crazy. You don't have to fix everything. The avoidant will stop moving away when you're like, hey, you come back when you're ready. It'll almost feel weird to them at first, but they'll lean into it. And the same thing with the disorganized. By doing that reassurance, we're telling them, I'm not mad, I'm still here, I'm not going anywhere. It may feel too good to be true, but I promise you that this is just how it's going to be with us. That reinforcement is going to go a long way, especially if that secure can be consistent with it over a long period of time. A consistent, secure attachment over a period of 6 months to a year with somebody showing consistent reinforcement will literally pull that person out of their attachment style long enough that they can attach in a more healthy manner, and they can come up with new communication patterns for each of them that work better. But they can't do that unless the secure is willing to be consistent with them on a regular basis. Then reframing safety is another tool we can use. Calm doesn't mean cold. Steady doesn't mean distant. So reassuring your partner that, like, look, just because I'm calm doesn't mean I don't have emotions. I still have emotions, right? And again, this is secure talking. Calm doesn't mean that I'm cold. It just means that, I don't need to react to the emotions. Even if I feel bad about what you're saying to me, I'm going to stay calm and we're going to talk this through. Everything's going to be okay. We're going to figure out a solution. That, again, it's reassurance, but it's more on that we are safe where we're at, right? Telling them that, just because I'm steady and I'm consistent doesn't mean I'm distant, right? Doesn't mean that I'm not wanting to be there for you, okay? So we need to reframe that. Secure plus an anxious, avoidant, or disorganized can be difficult, but it's probably one of the easier ones of all of them, because the secure can pull the other person out of their place, right? So how do we work towards a more secure attachment if I am anxious, if I am avoidant, if I am disorganized? Well, the first thing I tell every client, no matter your attachment style, no matter what trauma you've been through, awareness equals power. Aware of my behaviors is 100% power. Once I'm aware what I'm doing and I realize it's unhealthy, then I can start figuring out ways to combat it. I can figure out where it came from. I can figure out who does it look like in my past, so that way I can not treat somebody like that that's new in my life like that old partner. But I won't know that until I come up with the awareness, right? Why does my system interpret this as a threat? And what's the cost of that interpretation? Having that awareness to take that step back before we behave, because we can feel that this is an unhealthy behavior. It's first thing, awareness, right? Then emotional regulation. Before speaking, stabilize your system. Breathe. Give yourself 1 to 2 to 3 breath cycles of 4-4-4-4, like a box breathing, or a 4-7-8, or a 4-4-8, or a 4-4-6, whatever it is, right? We take those deep breaths for 1 to 3 cycles before we speak. We journal, we walk, or we ground ourselves. Tactile grounding, actual grounding outside with the grass under your feet, some form of grounding. We have the nervous system information loop, where we can put our hand on our heart and our hand on our stomach, and we can breathe, and that gives a feedback loop to our nervous system that we are safe. We can use that one. But we use some form of way of regulating our nervous system first, and then telling ourselves, is this a pattern or is this a person? Right? Is the pattern what is triggering me, or is it the person specifically that's triggering me? If it's the person specifically that's triggering you, that means that they are the problem. They know better, and they're doing it on purpose. If it's a pattern, that means that you have not addressed it with that person. They probably don't even know that they're doing it to you. Okay, so again, is this a pattern or is it the person? What I like to also do to work towards that secure attachment style is build in micro safety moments. Ask for what you need clearly. I feel disconnected. A text check-in helps me feel safe. Set boundaries with warmth. I need space to think, but I'll come back to this. Okay, so the anxious person, they're going to say the thing like, I feel disconnected. A text check-in helps me feel safe. And when I say you're going to say these things, you're going to ask for what you need from your partner. You have to understand that to get to being secure, you have to act like a secure. You have to at least fake it till you make it in a little bit, and try some of these techniques, because a secure person is going to communicate in a very direct and very open and very calm way. I feel disconnected. I need a text check-in with you to feel more safe. Okay? So if they're not feeling like their needs are being met, they're going to clearly say them. So if you are anxious and you aren't very good at communicating it, you need to learn how to communicate those needs in the moment, and then start doing it. Those micro moments of safety. Then you're going to set boundaries for the avoidant. I need space to think, but I'll come back to this. Because again, a secure attachment style is hallmarked by being able to set boundaries. So if a secure needs to be able to set boundaries with ease, avoidants need to learn that same thing, because what they're doing is actually not healthy for the relationship, but they do need the boundary. So we have to communicate the boundary. It's okay to take space in a relationship. Even secure attachment partners are going to take space the same way an avoidant does. However, they're going to bind it by time, just like we talked about, and they're going to communicate. I need space to think about this. Give me a few minutes, give me an hour, whatever the case may be. They're going to communicate it. So an avoidant needs to learn to do the same thing. It's okay that you have the bad behaviors. It's okay that you have these behaviors that are hard to control. Communicate it with your partner, what's going on, and allow them some space to process that you just told them that you're taking space and that you need to, and that you're communicating. That will help them feel more secure and more attached. Again, we are trying to mimic the type of attachment style that we want to be. So we have to look at where we are lacking as each one of the attachment styles before we do that. And just remember that secure attachment is trainable. Therapy, coaching, reflective journaling, and relationship work can all teach your nervous system that love is safe and connection is sustainable. One of the big things I work on is how to attach in a relationship in a healthy manner. We talk about it using the relationship attachment model. And by doing that, we make a person more secure, because as that, like we talked about awareness, right? It's awareness of what matters to me as I attach in a relationship, how I'm going to attach better, and I have more confidence as I attach to know that I'm not supposed to do this until I'm attached at this level. I can't commit with this until I trust at this level. And by doing that, we have a much more confident way of attaching to people. Having that confident way of attaching to people will slowly train me how to be healthier with my attachment style. The more work I do on my awareness and how to regulate, I'm going to get better. Okay, so you got to go through the work. And again, it's not something that you can book for 6 sessions with a coach and be like, oh my gosh, I so am like a secure attachment style now. It's going to take a long period of time, and it's going to take getting triggered. It's going to take experience with other partners of the other styles to understand how to combat it and to stay secure in yourself. Okay, but it is possible. I've seen people change their attachment style simply by doing this work on a regular basis over a period of time and not shying away from it, which means you have to take the ugly look inward. You have to admit where you are the problem. You cannot blame on anyone else for the way you have behaved. Yes, the way they have behaved, it can be fuel to the fire, but that doesn't mean that I didn't set the fire ablaze by lighting a match. And by understanding and looking at my behaviors, I could have stopped 90% of the problems in a relationship if I had cured my behavior and not been so worried about curing theirs. We can hold on to relationships if we decide that we want to work on the things that we are bad at and not start pointing the finger at how they need to change their behavior. Look inward first. Healthy relationships will come outwardly after. Okay. But that's all I got for you guys today. I hope this was informative. I see from some of the comments that that some of these things are great concepts for you guys to learn. Hopefully you learned a whole lot out of this class. But that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys all have a great week. Again, remember the fallen today. Don't thank your veterans. Don't thank active duty service members. We have days specifically for that. Think about those that have given their life and just pray for their families at this point, because a lot of them, their families years down the road, I know are still hurting from the loss of that father, of that daughter, of that son, of that mother. That's where the problems are, is those families now, right? So remember and lift up those families in your prayers today. But other than that, have a great rest of your weekend, and I will catch you guys next Sunday for another Live at 5. And as always, stay safe, keep the faith.